Good morning. I'm in Flower Mound, Texas. I've thought the last couple of days, if I were in a large international bank about starting a finance transformation program, what would be the things that I would try to do for my experience to speed up the experiences I've had in the past? How would I make a map that helps me understand what I have to do in my journey, how big the problem is, and how to organize my people and time against that problem? Well, I divide the problem I've decided into two parts. One part is you have to decide what the platform looks like that's going to manage this financial data, give you the information you need. You have to put that platform together. Typically isn't something you can just buy. For large international banks, it's not something that there is an existing service provider that can manage the kind of data that you will typically have and what the critical requirement of the daily financial cycle. So you have to somehow come to grips with what is that platform. But let's let that aside for a moment. Assuming that that platform exists, or that you have that in some way, or you can build it in some reasonable period of time, then the other part of the problem is getting your data into that platform. And getting your data into the platform is something that can take a long time to do because nobody owns your data, you own your data. Your data sits within your source systems. Often that data is not remembered, what the flow is for that data. It's embedded in code. People have changed over time. They can go find answers to questions, but it's not something you can do all at once. It's something that happens over time. You have to break up the problem by source system to get that data into your platform. So the first thing that would be helpful in this problem space is to have a map. Maps help us determine where we have to go, what the problems are we're going to have to overcome. So if I were to make a more detailed map on your data in that platform, I've decided I would put 3 dimensions against that. The first dimension is going to be a listing of the source systems. Our finance platform has to contain all the data for the enterprise. To get to the balance sheet and income statement, it has every financial transaction. So the first dimension of our map is to say, what are all those sources of all of that data? And I would organize it source system by source system. If you're a bank, it's going to be things like, what are the loan systems? What are the treasury systems? What are the deposit systems? What are the administration systems? All of those things would be grouped on this thing. And how do you rank those so that you get some value from the map? One ranking would be by the percentage of the balance sheet. If this source system provides 1% of the balance sheet, it's going to have less value than a source system that provides 10% of the balance sheet. The other dimension I would then lay out on that graph, what are the perspectives that are reflected within that source system? What perspectives does my platform need to support? And by perspectives, I'm talking about how broad of a set of outputs am I trying to produce from the platform? What are the consolidated data supply chains I'm trying to support within this platform? Perspectives are things like customer view. Finance platform only presents the aggregated customer view of things. That's usually what's maintained in the source system. So we don't have to do a lot of new things for the data to just get that source system and pop it into the platform. That's not usually adequate for finance platforms. We have to provide the enterprise perspective. But when we say enterprise perspective, there's a lot of different meanings to that. Enterprise perspective in one sense can be IFRS, International Financial Reporting Standards, IFRS perspective, that's another perspective. So maybe customers one, and then IFRS is another. Now, if you have IFRS, you might have a local GAAP that also needs to be presented from the platform in certain instances. Another perspective, though, can be our management reporting perspective, key performance indicators. You can have risk perspectives, for example, credit risk aspects. We have product control. All of these data supply chains, as I call them, are the different perspectives that need to come from those sources into the platform. All of those different perspectives that need to be reflected should be reflected on the second dimension of this, by source system. So now within a source system, you can start to say, this source system is important for this percentage of the balance sheet, and this source system needs to reflect these perspectives. And the source system may not give you that perspective. The source system may turn data over to other processes in the organization that add that perspective. But to have it into your platform, you're going to have all of those sources, whatever generated the other perspective, that data has to get into the platform in some way. So right there, you start to get a sense of the depth of tracing that has to happen in a source system to find the data that has to go into your platform. The third dimension to the graph is a little bit harder to describe specifically, but I think one of the term that I've settled on that might be best in conversation with my friend Sandy Parisi about this would be value. What is the value of that data, or the complexity of that data? Value can be reflected. We've done a little bit of value by saying percentage of the balance sheet. That's kind of like value, but it's also value and complexity, or value and interest. The deposit systems, retail deposit systems, don't have a lot of complexity to them. There's not a lot of regulatory questions that are asked about them. They tend to have lower interest for the organization to use that data in lots of different ways than there is around loan systems, which have much more risk. So there's a lot more queries that go on in use of the data and inquiry and detail needed when you get to loan systems quite frequently than there is to deposit systems. Treasury systems can even step that up further. Treasury systems can have huge throughputs, huge dollar values that go on with each transaction, and there can be lots of transactions that happen intraday all the time on these systems. The kind of regulatory questions that get asked about treasury systems are very high. The complexity value of that data is going to be very high. So that third dimension starts to get us a ranking of, how important is this system to, and it might be independent of the percentage of the balance sheet, how important is this system to have on the platform? So from that graph, that cube that we've made, that map that we've made, we can start to prioritize what places are going to be easy, what places are going to be hard, what places have high value, what places have low value. And we can start to then try to deploy teams against those source systems to go find the data for that source system and get it into our platform in the right way. If you're capable of breaking up and running all of those different source systems in parallel in terms of getting the data out of them, you're going to shorten the time frame. Source systems, by perspectives, by complexity, the more we could deploy teams and in parallel try to get this data into our platform. That problem is what will shorten the cycle towards getting the problem solved for the enterprise in the shortest time periods possible. That's the way I think about one aspect of a large picture perspective of this finance transformation problem.